Good morning. I'll give you another crack at that. Good morning. Good morning. All right. So we took a nice little break last week in Mother's Day, but now we're back in Romans. So go ahead and turn your Bibles or your gadgets to Romans chapter 12. And today we will finish said chapter, specifically going through verses 9 to 21 of Romans chapter 12. Give you a moment there to find your places. And if not, I think we have the verses projected in front of you as well. This is the type of chapter or section that, and I usually don't do this, but it is appropriate. You almost have to spend as much time on the introduction as you do on the content, and you'll see why. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that from chapter 1 to chapter 11, that portion was much more theological, big picture type of things that applies to all of humanity. And moving forward from chapter 12, the last few chapters of this book of Romans, then you get into more of a practical, smaller ideas, more precise things as to how we should act. So that's kind of the style and the content that we are looking at. So if you think about it, trying to illustrate it in other ways, previously in this letter, Paul was utilizing like a nuclear bomb. And you can't escape that, right? It just kills, annihilates, affects everyone around it. It's just one big weapon that destroys all who are within a radius of that bomb going off. But it's just one thing, one big thing, but it's just one. Now, Paul, he uses a machine gun. He grabs the machine gun, and now he's mowing people down. Now, you've seen enough movies to know that not every single bullet is going to affect you, is going to reach you, you're not going to be affected by every single one of them. You're going to get shot because it's a machine gun, right? But not every single bullet is going to affect you, much like an atom bomb, a nuclear weapon, right? So here, it's almost like these rapid fire teachings, and he's going to just mow people down, but they're smaller, they're more particular with regards to practice, important, but important in other ways. When we read this section, and moving forward, it applies to the content moving forward as well, what you will see is the content of Romans now, and again moving forward, it resembles a lot the Sermon on the Mount. Do you remember that? Sermon on the Mount? Matthew chapter 5 and on, beginning with the Beatitudes. There, Jesus taught a bunch of things, all of them very important, all of them very applicable, but many topics and many ethical issues, one after the other, after the other, and after the other. So it's going to resemble that, even to the point where many scholars believe that Paul was actually reflecting upon the Sermon on the Mount. Now, Paul is not writing a historical account of that segment of Scripture, partly because it didn't even exist. So here we're talking about Matthew chapter 5 and 6 and a little bit of 7. Well, that letter, that gospel, hadn't even been written yet, and it wouldn't be written for at least another 20 years. Now, that occasion, that occurrence happened 20 years prior to Paul's writing of to the Romans, right? But again, Matthew would be written 20 years after this. So we're talking about a 40-year period from when it actually happened. Again, Jesus preaching at that mountaintop, and then the writing, the documenting of that in Matthew chapter 5. But here we have something in between where it is very likely that Paul is alluding to those types of teaching. Not literally, but he's grabbing some of these topics and utilizing them in this section of Romans. So most likely this is what we are going to experience. Moving forward. So since there are a lot of things happening here, you could go about it in one of two directions. You could stop every single time Paul mentions something and spend some time defining that and trying to apply that individually, or you can kind of sum it up as a whole and look at, one strain of thought, one common denominator that kind of attaches all of these ideas together, or you could try to do both of those at once, and this is what I'm going to try to do. Not necessarily define all of these individually and not just summing them up as one thing, but trying to do both at the same time, which is why, again, I'm spending so much time in the introduction of this segment as opposed to just kind of getting to it right off the bat. So again, here we are in Romans chapter 12. We're going through verse 9 to verse 21, but the common denominator, one of the things that will bring all of these teachings together, it's actually something that Paul mentioned earlier in chapter 12, specifically speaking, verse 2. So I'll read that, and you can follow along if you have access to that verse in front of you. So on Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Again, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Now, obviously, we've already talked about this, the idea, and I think I used the cookie cutter illustration. Remember that a couple weeks ago? Where basically this idea of you being conformed to the world's standards, much like cookie dough being conformed to that shape that you press on top of it so that it becomes either a circle or a reindeer during Christmas or a pumpkin during Halloween or whatever you want to make that cookie look like. So that's, roughly the idea. But I want to touch upon the meaning of those two terms initially because it will resonate with the remaining part of this chapter. Again, we're talking about the idea of conforming versus transforming. Now in English, it doesn't seem like it's very different, conforming or transforming. But in the original, in the Greek language, those two are very distinct type of transformations, if you will. The first term, the conforming term, which Paul says, do not conform to this world, it's a term utilized more of a superficial change. Literally, that cookie cutter idea where basically you are just changing the shape of the dough. Here we're not talking about intrinsic change. We're not talking about essential change. We're not talking about changes that alter who you really are internally. We're just talking about things on the surface. And Paul is basically saying, look, there are many things in the world that are superficial.
They're here today and they're gone tomorrow. They seem like important. It seems like it's almost life-altering or life-changing, but they're actually very much superficial. And now some of those things are really bad. Other things, they seem good, and many others are in between. They're kind of neutral. But regardless, it's just surface. It's superficial. So do not try to be conformed or conform yourself to these worldly ethics, to these worldly standards, not necessarily because they're horrible, but because they're very much superficial. What you need to try to do is to change, is to be transformed. And then we have that other term that Paul uses. So again, he uses the word conformed, pertaining to what we shouldn't do with the world, but then he uses the word transformed by the renewing of our minds as it applies to our Christian walk. Now that term transformed, it has the sense of internal, essential change, things that really alter who you are. It's the term that we derive our idea of metamorphosis. It's the term that is utilized when Jesus was transfigured. It's the term that is utilized when a butterfly becomes a butterfly, right? Prior to that, what is that? Like a worm, not a worm, caterpillar. I was going to say thank you, but no. So it's a complete change of essence. It's not superficial. It's not just the shape. It's who you are that needs to be changed through this knowledge of Christ Jesus and the changing of your mind that is part of this process. So this is the encouragement. So again, going back to that cookie cutter illustration, if you've ever baked any sweets, cookies, cakes, or whatever, you have two options. And here you only have two options. Ideally, you'd have more, but here you only have two options. Either you can eat or provide to someone a beautiful looking cookie or cake or any other, thing that is close to those two. Perfect shaped, just adorned beautifully, great coloring, or you can provide something that actually tastes good, that has the right ingredients, that has the amount of the right ingredients. Because sometimes you have the right ingredients, but you do not put the right amount. And you bake it in the appropriate temperature. And you leave it there for the appropriate time. And all of those things come together to produce something that actually tastes good inherently. That is good when you taste it. Which one would you rather have? You only have those two choices. Either it looks good or it tastes good. Which one would you rather be? This is essentially what Paul is touching upon. You can be a great shaped cookie, or you can be a great tasting cookie. Only two choices. Choose which one you want to be. Now, Paul here, he is assuming that you will choose the latter. That you will want to be transformed as opposed to just conformed in the external fashion, in just the visible fashion, in just the worldly way of looking at who can be a good person or a bad person or a productive member of society. Paul does not care about that because it's all superficial. Paul cares about you, who you really are, what your heart is all about, where your spirit is. And because of that, now he is going to again grab the machine gun. I'll need that in a second. He's going to grab the machine gun, and now he's going to just shoot at you. And again, you might want to dodge some of these bullets, and some of them you might be able to dodge, sort of like the Matrix. But you will not be able to dodge all of them, because quite a few of these will apply to you directly. You're going to be hit. Not like the nuclear weapon, but these smaller bullets, some of them, hopefully, will reach your heart. Now, let's get to the text, and I will need this now. So again, let's start from verse 9 and make our way all the way to the end. Verse 21. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love. In honor, giving preference to one another. Not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. Distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind towards one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as it depends upon you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So touching upon, again, as I said, many principles, many teachings, many ethical ideas that one should incorporate so that he or she can be changed from the inside out. And Paul starts off by mentioning the idea of love, which, could be one of those primary things that applies to everything else that he has written here. And he says that we should love, but without hypocrisy. Now, here he is basically alluding to this choice that you have. Again, you're a cookie. And you only have two choices. You can be a great-looking cookie or a great-tasting cookie. If you are just concerned with being a great-looking cookie, you will look upon the world and you will gather information as to what love means to the world. How does one feel loved in the world? How does one love someone else based on worldly standards? But then Paul defines what that means. He says that type of love is hypocritical love. And he's telling you, be a good tasting cookie. Don't worry about the shape. Don't worry about the external standards. Don't worry about the world's view of love, because that is full of hypocrisy. What is hypocrisy? Hypocrisy is a term originally derived from the Greek that applied to actors. So in classical times, actors, a single actor, would play multiple roles. And that action of an actor playing multiple roles was described as hypocrisy in a sense, because they would put a mask and play a particular role and then leave, come back, put another mask and play another role, and then do that over and over again. That's where you get that mask with the happy face, sad face that, actors use. So that's the idea. It is an action that is masked, that is camouflaged. It's a facade. It looks kind of cool. Man, that same actor is playing a guy, then it's playing a girl, portraying one character, portraying another character. It's entertaining. And it takes a lot of talent. But it's fake. It's just on the surface. It's the same person. The differences, it's just superficial. So a hypocritical type of love is a love that is just concerned with the outward-looking aspects of love. It's just concerned with saying the right words. It's just concerned with doing things when everybody is around, looking, experiencing that, witnessing that. It's just concerned with doing things that one might be strategically doing because he or she expects something in return. Again, it's a type of love. It's the type of love that is predominant in the world, but it's not real love. It's not the type of love that Jesus typified, exemplified, showed. Jesus' love had nothing to do with people looking at him while he was doing something loving. Actually, it was the opposite. Many times he wanted to do things isolated from the crowds. It's the type of love that he didn't expect anything in return, but not only that, he knew that the things that he was doing most likely would not be accepted as such, as love. People would actually ridicule him, accuse him of doing wrong things while he was being loving. It's the type of love that was willing to sacrifice it all, paying the price to do that which is loving. You don't see that in the world. That is not the standard of love from a worldly perspective. So Paul is saying, if you're going to be transformed by the renewing of your mind pertaining to love, do it without hypocrisy. Do not mimic how the world loves. Does the world love? Does it attempt to love? Yes. But it's hypocritical. It's a facade. It's a mask. Intrinsically, internally, essentially, it is not love. He goes on to say, abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. Again, either you're going to look like a great cookie or you're going to taste like a great cookie. The world, even though it portrays evil things as good, they are actually still evil. And how often are we tempted to partake in evil things because they are packaged as something good, something pleasing, something entertaining, something acceptable, something that it's not a big deal? How often? Now, we can internalize that and say, well, it's not a big deal. We've moved forward. We've advanced in society. Maybe that before was bad, but now it's not that bad. Or we can accept it for what it truly is, evil. And then once you do that, you only have one choice. Either you're going to accept it or you're going to abhor it, because there's no middle term. There's no middle ground. But that is not enough, Because we should not just live a life of hating evil. That's only half of the equation. We should also love and cling to what is good, and that's probably even a bigger challenge. Because God does not just accept us to be dormant and neutral and just, be in a coma. Oh, if I'm in a coma, I'm not doing anything bad. I'm not actively sinning. Well, that's only half of the equation. Because the other half is you clinging to what is good. And the term there literally means just bonding yourself to what is good. Oftentimes we consider, this is good. I want to mildly associate to that. If good is walking around, if I'm going this way down the street, and if good is coming towards me, I'm not going to ignore good. I'm going to give the cool guy nod. Do you do that? Women, you do not know how to do that because you chatter too much. Guys, when you see, you don't even have to know the other guy, the other bro. When they're coming towards you and you're coming towards them, you know that you just do the nod, right? And that's something, very male, very manly. It's something that both of you expect from one another. If you don't get the nod, you're like, come on, man. At least the nod. So if good is coming towards you, or you're going towards good, we usually say, I'll nod towards good. I'll spend some time with good. I'll associate with good whenever it's appropriate, whenever it's convenient, whenever, the timing is right. That's not what Paul is saying here. Paul is saying that you should cling to what is good. That is different. That is completely different. Clinging, the term here that he only uses that term one other time in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, if I'm not mistaken. And there he is describing the differences between someone clinging themselves to a harlot as opposed to clinging themselves to the Spirit. And the choice is obvious. Which one should you do? The clinging is the same. But you should cling to the Spirit, not a harlot. So abhor evil, shun evil, but cling to what is good. The other day, back to the clinging thing, yesterday. Some of you are cringing already. I was walking the dog with the boys, and in my backyard, we go into like the wilderness, right? And, our dog just goes crazy and goes, in the bushes and whatnot. And he did. So then we go back to the trail. And as we are moving forward, one of the boys noticed that something was clinging onto the dog. But it was significantly sized. It was almost the size of like a penny. And it was a tick there for probably multiple weeks because it was huge. And at first I was like, is this a tumor? And then automatically I thought of Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not a tumor. Because I was worried I was going to have to take it to the vet. But it was not a tumor. It was a tick clinging. Obviously, negative connotation, but same idea applies. It was hard to take that tick off of Ramon's neck because it was there. And it was just enjoying itself for a while, to the point where it was like, I've never seen a tick that large. But it was clinging. Close parentheses. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another. The term preference here, the idea of preference, has to do with putting one before you. The advancement of someone else, allowing that person to get dibs, if you will. in the general sense of the word. So here, Paul is saying, look, when you try to figure out who should benefit, make sure that you're not always favoring the self. Make sure that others get benefited before you. Because often, again, the world's concept is, just as long as everybody benefits, it's okay. I want to be first, though. Because I want to make sure that I get the right size of the pie. Here, all of our illustrations are baked good illustrations. Right? I want to make sure everybody's going to get a slice. But I want to be first because I don't want to get gypped. I want to make sure I either cut my piece or I choose the biggest piece. And Paul is saying, no. Allow others before you to get that prized piece of the pie. Verse 11, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. The term that is most interesting here in this verse 11, it's the idea of fervent. Fervent has to do with like boiling water. Think of the Spirit as fire, right? Which is appropriate because a lot of times we see that analogy in the Bible itself. But fire causes something, right? Hardly ever do you see fire, not causing an effect on something else. Naturally, it causes an effect. It burns. And here, it boils. So think of yourself as a pot of water. And if the Spirit is fire, there's a cause and there should be an effect. You should be boiling over. There should be something happening with you if the Spirit is, in fact, acting out within you. Because if nothing is happening, if you're not bubbling, if you're not boiling, then there's something wrong with the fire. But guess what? There's nothing wrong with the fire. There may be something wrong with you. Verse 12, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. Now it's interesting because Paul here, he doesn't say that we should rejoice in immediate results, which again, only two choices. Either you're a great shaped cookie or a beautifully flavored cookie. The world's concept of joy has to do with being pleased by the immediate results of something. You do something, you get something in return, and then you're happy. And then there's joy, and then you're pleased. Not Joyce, you're there. There's Joyce. That's the world's concept of joy. Immediate gratification, immediate satisfaction. I do something, I receive something in return. It's a byproduct. But here Paul is saying, rejoicing in hope. Does hope come automatically? What is hope? Something that you believe that you do not yet see. You do not yet experience. It is a truth that you take to heart, that you understand, that it is true, but you do not yet experience. And sometimes you do not even benefit from it. But you rejoice in it. Can you understand how counterintuitive those two little words put together are? We blow right by it, right? Rejoice in hope. Sure. Seems pretty biblical and pretty spiritual, but think about what it means. Rejoice in understanding that something beneficial will happen even though you do not experience it yet, and maybe will not experience that for a very long time. Do you know what the world calls that? Misery. That's what the world calls that concept. Can you imagine? You investing in something, you don't get the return even though you believe in that? The world calls that misery. But Paul calls it something else. You rejoice in hope. You're patient. You're steadfast in prayer. You don't just give up. You don't just give in because, again, you don't see the results. Verse 13, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. The term hospitality in the original literally is being friendly to strangers. Now, this is a concept that was very important at this particular time, and here, appropriately applied, oftentimes you had these travelers, missionaries of sorts, or Christians that go from one place to another. They needed a place to stay, and one would open their doors or their homes so that these travelers could sleep, could rest, could be nourished in these people's homes, even though they did not even know them. Now here, Paul is not encouraging for you to just open up your home to any, stranger, if you will. That is dangerous. But the concept is being hospitable in the world's view. What is that? It's inviting people over for Thanksgiving, people that you know, right? People that you already care for. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that is not a biblical concept of hospitality. The biblical concept of hospitality is giving of yourself, of what you own, of what you have, specifically your home, to others that may need that you're not going to get any return from that, relationally or financially. There are no connections there other than there's a need and I am meeting that need. Again, the world does not portray hospitality in that fashion. Does it? There is a facade of hospitality. There is a mask of hospitality. That term is utilized, but not in that sense, because you'd be crazy. Even if the person is a legitimate person, a good person, you would be crazy to open your doors and want to meet their needs. You have to run their social security number through first, call the right agencies to figure out a background check. You have to time it accordingly because, life is busy. You have to see if it fits within your schedule. And then Paul goes on from verse 14 to verse 21. So here I'm not going to continue as I have been, kind of defining and talking about every single aspect of what he is documenting here. So now from verse 14 to 21, I'm going to kind of clump it up into one idea. And I mentioned this, right? I'm going to try to do both at once. So let me read 14 to 21. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind towards one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil, having regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, and here he's going to quote a proverb, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Up until this point, it seems like Paul is describing the actions that you should have with someone that is relatively friendly towards you. probably a fellow Christian, church member, family member, if you will. Still challenges, but no animosity. From verse 14 to verse 21, it seems like he's talking about our action towards those who have animosity against us. That's kind of the big picture. That is the main idea. What should we do when dealing with those who sometimes even hate us? But here we don't have to go overboard, right? We don't have to think about, okay, what should I do when I encounter someone that completely and utterly hates me and vice versa? You may have those occasions in life every once in a while, but that's not often, right? It's not like the animosity towards, I don't know, Padres fans and Dodgers fans. Your hat is confusing me. You have a Padres hat, but it's blue and white. So that's kind of coming together there. Parentheses closed. You need not think about these extremes, but just think of interactions where there is a little bit of animosity, where there is somewhat of an annoyance there. Again, I think it's much more fruitful and appropriate. Don't think of the extremes, right? What would you do if you encountered Hitler in World War II, right? No. Just think of the people that you encounter with on a daily basis, weekly basis, and every once in a while, whether if it's something constant or, again, the exception to the rule, but there is a little bit of animosity, there's a little bit of fighting, there's a little bit of discord, disagreement. No one experiences that, right? No one. Everyone. What should you do? How should you act? Again, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. How tempting is it to wish harm upon those who annoy you, who get on your nerves? For that split second, even if you're not like totally serious about it. And Paul's not even saying do not hate them. He's saying not only do not curse them, but actually do the opposite. Bless them. Again, how counter is that from the world standard? The world standard is, look, don't kill anyone, right? Don't throw a rock at people's windows. That's totally uncalled for. Don't cut them off and give them the bird, just road rage is so 2000s, right? Not politically correct at all. But the world does not go beyond that. At most, the world says, don't be a jerk. But how often does the world teach actually bless, call blessings upon those who you have those difficult dealings with? Paul is saying, pick one or the other. Be of the same mind towards one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Don't get a big head. People don't like those type of people. Don't be those type of people. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, Paul acknowledges that you don't have total control, and oftentimes that is our excuse. Look, I don't have control over the dynamics of this relationship. Paul acknowledges that, but he's saying, as far as you're concerned, to the extent that you can control, do what is possible. And oftentimes, again, we use the excuse of not being in total control for not doing that which is possible. Right? Live peaceably. Do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. What is giving place to wrath? If wrath needs to be given, you say that belongs to the Lord. If there are consequences to actions, if something needs to be remedied, Something needs to be corrected. Punishments need to be given. That belongs to the Lord. And then again, the proverb is quoted here. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Now, it seems weird, right? Heaping coals of fire is actually something good. And there are many assumptions as to exactly what that means. But it's something positive. We know that for sure. You know, coals, it has the connotation of sometimes judgment, but oftentimes purification. We see that in Isaiah, right, when he was cleansed by that coal, when he was called. But anyways, it's something good, right? And we'll leave it at that. And then it ends by saying, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Now, again, verse 14 to verse 21. The most counterintuitive thing of all here. Actually, repay evil with good. How do we deal with the animosity that this world not only condones, but oftentimes stimulates constantly? This fallen world that we live in. And what I thought about was this historical, significant occasion. During the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln, he was given a speech, as he usually did, right? But this was at the height of the Civil War, you know, North against South. And during his speech, he was talking about, you know, both parties. And he addressed the South, the enemies, in a somewhat positive light. He was saying, look, those are human beings. They are in the wrong, but those are our brethren. They are like us. And as a response to that, some were outraged. They even confronted him, saying, what do you mean? Those are our enemies. Those are the devils. They need to be destroyed. And to that he responded, quoting a classical writing. He didn't make this up, but he said, do I not destroy my enemies once I make them my friends? Does that not happen? Do not my enemies, are they not destroyed once they become my friends? And that's our challenge. Going against the grain of society, of the world. Going against the grain of our own hearts and our own feelings oftentimes. And actually going out of our way to mimic how Jesus lived. Again, it's very Sermon of the Mount, on the Mount here. These ideals are very hard to achieve, and some people say it is impossible to achieve. Nevertheless, regardless of where you're at, these are the encouragements and these are the teachings. And once more, Paul is not using the nuclear weapon here. He's using the machine gun. And some of these you may be able to dodge, but you will get hit. So you might as well start putting this into practice. And please, be a good flavored cookie and not just a good shaped cookie. Amen?